We reviewed the full-size Taniwha last year, but we wanted to check out the shorter travel Taniwha trail. Now, calling this a gearbox bike is kind of like calling the rest of the bikes we brought to Southwest Utah derailleur bikes. The drivetrain does not define the Taniwha trail, but it wouldn't be a bad place to start.
So it's a 600% gear range in it, right? Which is, they say, it's basically the equivalent of like a 1060 cassette in the back. And I've ridden a bunch of internal gearboxes, so I'm sort of used to the quirks of that great big drift shifty thing that has a huge range of swing to it. And I like the fact that you can be coming down something, setting up for a turn, you can just grab like 5 gears. And then when you start pedaling, it's in that gear. It's sort of magic. But when we're so used to derailleur systems and how those shift and always having them in motion, always loading, when you do try to load one of these and shift, it will not shift at all. And then there are some instances with how that grip shifter worked for some of us.
For me, obviously I have the smallest hands out of the bunch here. I definitely found a lot of difficulty when it came time to do the shifting. And I don't, like, I can open a mayonnaise jar or two. I have pretty strong grip strength. And yet when it came time to push that grip shift over, I struggled with it at times. It's not to say that these things are insurmountable, but they're definitely something to consider if you are on the smaller end of the spectrum.
I mean, someday they're gonna find a way to make the shifting electronic on this one.
I feel like this whole technology will become very, very exciting for a really large swath of people.
And then there's the drag, which there is a certain amount of mechanical drag in this. You can feel it. It's also got an idler that you're running through. So you don't have derailleurs that you're moving through. You don't really have any chain guides, but to me, I noticed that if your cadence dropped and you were kind of pushing it like some 60 RPM, just make it up this thing because you couldn't get it in quite the right gear or something, that was when I would feel like I can feel this. And even if it's just in your head, and it isn't really enough drag. It's like a scraping brake rotor almost, where you could hear it and feel it, and you could feel it in the handlebars even. It's like, make it stop.
Well, it depends on your cadence. Like if you're not mongoing up everything and you get a nice even smooth cadence, then it's a lot less noticeable. If you are, it rides kind of heavy, and it's not. I mean, this is 32.5 pounds or so. I mean, for something with this big, I mean, if you hold a Pinion Gearbox in your hand, I mean, it's like a newborn. Like there's
That's not how you hold a newborn.
Okay, so, but speaking of that mass and the centralization of it, back to what you were about to say earlier about some of the other more intangible benefits of why Zerode chose to go with the Pinion Gearbox, locating it there, how that's going to work on the suspension, and how that works on the bike's chassis dynamics.
Here's where things get interesting. Without the weight of a derailleur or a multi-speed cassette or the extra chain, you get an incredibly light rear end. One that's incomparably sensitive to impact, small or big, climbing or descending, and we noticed it.
It's a really light wheel. So when you're hitting something, there's so little weight to move out of the way that it's super supple. And then on the other side of that is all the mass that's in the frame. So it has this calming effect to the way the bike rides, and makes the bike feel super planted and really predictable. And the same is true with the longer travel Taniwha. And that thing felt kind of piggy because all that extra weight, when you try and put input into it, it just sucks it down to the ground because it's a 160 mil travel bike. This is 140 front and rear, it's the trail oriented one. And I didn't feel that nearly as much. I felt it to be a lot more responsive, but with that same trail sensitivity benefit.
Yeah, super, super plush. Very linear, nice suspension that was really responsive off of all the little chundery, rocky, ledgy things. And the bike was just stuck to the ground in a way. Like it cornered beautifully.
Yeah, this is, I think, the best cornering bike that I've ridden out of the entire bunch of bikes that we've ridden so far. And that was the thing I found the most pleasantly surprising part about that Pinion Gearbox is that, to me, its biggest advantage had nothing to do with shifting. It had everything to do with being able to rail around the corners, have full confidence as you're doing it, and just have a lot of fun.
Zerode likes doing unique stuff with spec. Cane Creek front and rear, Magura brakes, which
are polarizing.
Yeah,
I mean,
just like the bike.
there's a lot of risk taken on this bike. I mean, I don't see the Magura brakes spec'd on a lot of things that we're riding here today.
Same thing with the 9.8 dropper.
9.8 dropper, derby rims. I liked the spec on it. I thought the bike, like, the aesthetics of the shifter aside, I liked everything that was attached to the bike. I felt like the execution of it was really nice. It's a nicely made bike. I would like it personally to be a little bit longer in reach.
And that's something we should talk about, is that reach. This is one of those bikes, so we tend to test larges. We generally don't have Kristen testing a large.
Yes, because I am not a large person.
So-
However, we got on this bike, and what we found is that, you know, even though the geometry isn't super insane, I mean, it has a 66-degree head tube angle, it has a 75.5 seat tube angle, so nothing.
That's on par with what's considered cutting edge trail these days.
It has a 455 reach. I mean, there's nothing insane about this bike, and yet we hopped on it, and it fit us all a little bit differently. So this is definitely one of those bikes that you want to throw a leg over and see how it fits with you, and make sure it works with your body type and your way of riding a bike.
So ultimately for me, I would love to see this just a skosh longer in the frame, but I'd probably also be able to account for that with just a slightly longer travel fork. I think the way the rear suspension works and the way it behaves, I'm never going to envision this as like a cross country. I'd say the giant Trance that we have, even though it's a 29-inch wheel bike, is very much it's sort of a cross country bike on steroids, and this is more like a shrunk travel version of something that you just throw down mountains.
And everybody's going to say that the Pinion Gearbox is something that's totally bomb-proof, and you're not ever going to have any problems with it. You can go out there into the outback. Is there an outback in New Zealand?
Why did you have to do that? No, there's no outback in New Zealand. You can go out into the mud. There's lots of mud. You can go riding in the mud.
But when you're in the mud, your cables die.
Right, and your
these-
derailleurs clog up and break off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you won't have that problem, but these cables are a mess to swap. So one of those things that is going to make the shifting a little harder, and you may have to do it once in a while. Not so fun on this one, but you're not going to break your derailleurs off. And yeah.
So you get a wider range and more durable and reliable drivetrain, but we were most compelled by what the Pinion Gearbox did when we weren't shifting. The Taniwha trail is planted without needing endless travel or an endless wheelbase to plant it, but it's much more familiar feeling than the full-size Taniwha. We've got this bike's full review, as well as those of a bunch of derailleur bikes at bikemag.com.